The world saw her as a man. To pretend she was one, she behaved recklessly. She drank heavily and then ran through bonfires. She raced her car down dark country roads in rural Michigan in the middle of the night. "I was trying to drink myself to death to escape who I was," she said. "I wasn't allowed to be myself, so I didn't want to be anyone else." Then, at 35, she realized what she needed to do to be herself, accept that she's transgender and live openly as the woman she always knew she was. To do that, she said, she had to fix her body. But after the battle with herself came the battle with insurers. Not all transgender and gender non-conforming individuals need medical care to transition. And not all identify as a man or woman. Some resent the pressure to conform their bodies to traditional ideas about what makes a man or a woman, especially as a growing body of research questions the relationship between sex and gender. But those who seek solace in a typically masculine or feminine form say they are caught in a painful cycle of constantly having to prove that they are who they say they are to meet criteria set by physicians, insurance companies and lawmakers, and they fear that it's about to get harder. The Trump administration has signaled its intention in recent months to rewrite a federal rule that bars healthcare discrimination based on gender identity. Its current form, that rule is one of the precious few tools transgender patients have to fight insurance denials for various medical treatments and procedures that fall under the broad umbrella of gender-affirming or transition-related care. Even with the rule in place, Jasmine and 4 other patients in different states detailed protracted battles for coverage. Jasmine began taking hormones in 2012 before she had insurance, paying out of pocket. In 2014, she got on a Michigan Medicaid plan offered by Priority Health. For the past 4 years, she's been fighting to get coverage for vaginoplasty and facial feminization. Her doctors say the surgeries are medically necessary to treat her gender dysphoria, the diagnostic term for the distress she feels over the conflict between her gender and the sex she was assigned at birth. Jasmine Glenn has been challenging insurance denials for 4 years for gender-affirming surgery. After rounds of appeals, she won pre-authorization for vaginoplasty but not a prerequisite hair removal procedure. After she was approved for hair removal and started treatments, her pre-authorization for vaginoplasty expired. Priority declined to again pre-authorize the surgery in 2018 on the grounds that it was no longer a benefit. Now, she is appealing the denial for vaginoplasty while her battle continues for facial feminization surgery. "Apparently, I am getting hair removed for prep for a surgery I now can't get," she said. "This crap is why I wish I were dead." Priority declined to comment on Jasmine's case, citing privacy laws. "Please know that we have dedicated doctors, nurses and clinicians on staff who work closely with our members to ensure they have the access to the care and treatment they need," the insurer said in a statement to CNN. "Our members' health and safety is always our first priority, a landmark protection for transgender patients. Until recently, American health insurers routinely defined gender-affirming procedures like the ones Jasmine is seeking as ineligible for coverage, even though the consequences of untreated gender dysphoria, including depression, substance abuse and suicide, are well documented. A series of protections enacted during the Obama years attempted to make it easier for patients to access coverage for such care. The most significant was a provision of the Affordable Care Act known as Section 1557, which banned discrimination based on race, color, national origin, sex, age or disability in federally funded health care facilities and insurance plans. A rule enacted in 2016 interpreted the ban on sex discrimination to include discrimination on the basis of gender identity. Meanwhile, 19 states and the District of Columbia have enacted laws or mandates against blanket exclusions for gender-affirming treatment and benefits packages. These measures applied to a sizable chunk of carriers, and many of them rushed to scrub their plans of exclusions and add benefits for transition-related care. A recent study linked the increase in coverage to an uptick in transition-related procedures from 2000 to 2014. Although progress has been steady, it's still very uneven based on what kind of coverage you have and where you live, said Harper-Jean Tobin, Director of Policy for the National Center for Transgender Equality, a nonprofit advocacy group. Though such exclusions are no longer permitted, CNN found that some policies offered on the ACU marketplace in 2018 still refused to cover gender-affirming procedures. One insurer, Health First, acknowledged that the policies we found online were outdated and thanked us for pointing them out. Two others, Medica and Oscar, said they did not cover such procedures because they were not included in a state's essential health benefits, a set of services insurers are required to cover under the ACA. Nothing in state or federal law precludes insurers from offering benefits that are not spelled out in a state's essential health benefits. But in a state without explicit anti-discrimination mandates, healthcare experts say there's little incentive for an insurer to be the only one offering gender-affirming benefits, especially if no one is holding them accountable. Further complicating matters is a lawsuit challenging Section 1557 from several religious healthcare providers, including Franciscan Alliance, Inc. Two insurers, Oscar and Health First, told CNN that a preliminary injunction meant that they did not have to cover transition-related treatment, an interpretation that LGBTQ patient advocates and legal experts say is incorrect. Ambetter and Mercy Care did not answer repeated requests for comment. Dean Care and MedMutual declined to comment. Trade Association America's Health Insurance Plans, AAHIP, said carriers comply with state and federal laws and work to ensure that members have access to services they need. If a patient encounters barriers, we would encourage them to have conversations with their healthcare plans to help ease the path to access to care, said Catherine Donaldson, Communications Director for the association. Now, LGBTQ advocates fear that Section 1557's gender identity protections may be rolled back. The Trump administration, in the last year plus, has been sending signals that it wants to not only not enforce but change its interpretation of healthcare law to exclude protections for transgender people, Tobin said. On February 13, government lawyers said in a court filing that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services had submitted a draft of a proposed rule to the White House, suggesting that it had come up with new regulations for Section 1557. The action was confirmed in a notice on the Office in Management and Budget's website. A federal court struck down the gender identity provisions of the rule as contrary to law and issued a nationwide injunction barring HHS enforcement. We are reconsidering the reasonableness, necessity, and efficacy of the rule in light of the injunction and will continue to vigorously enforce all prohibitions on discrimination in healthcare according to the law and court orders, before, during, and after any rulemaking, Roger Severino, director of the Office for Civil Rights within HHS, said in a statement to CNN. Fighting to be herself nearly 7 years ago, Jasmine was trapped in a cycle of despair fueled by alcoholism. After long days working in restaurants, she would often drink with friends in bars or their homes to the point of blacking out. I preferred to be in that Salvador Dali level of drunk, where everything's melting off the walls, she said. I was hurting, and so I wanted to watch the world burn. She began to rethink her life in 2011, while she was under supervised probation for her second drunken driving arrest. She was living in a trailer in her hometown of Allendale, Michigan, a semi-rural suburb of Grand Rapids, in the conservative part of the state, where hospitals and stadiums are named for the family of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Jasmine's driver's license had been revoked, and she was unable to leave home except for work and Alcoholics Anonymous. Sober for the first time in her adult life, she started looking online for the language to describe what she was experiencing. She heard success stories that defied the sensationalized portrayals of people who identify as transgender that she grew up watching on daytime talk shows. She connected with others who shared her anxieties and identified what she'd been trying to suppress with alcohol. After coming out to friends and family, she took the first step toward changing her body to match her gender, a process referred to as physically or medically transitioning. In 2014, she applied for insurance through a Michigan Medicaid plan offered by Priority Health. It took her months to find the right doctor and seek referrals, then months more of filing claims, receiving denials and appealing. Then came hearings in which, she says, Priority's representatives misgendered her by calling her a man even though she had been referring to herself in paperwork as a woman. She says they questioned her need for surgery despite her doctor's recommendations. She spent countless hours on the phone and researching court cases that she could cite as precedents in her favor. Although the battle consumed her waking hours and frustrated her, it was the only thing keeping her from taking her life, Jasmine said. I was so angry, I didn't understand why they were making it so hard, she said. There was only one other option, and I couldn't do that, because that would mean letting them win. Navigating a jurisdictional maze, Jasmine is not alone. Other people who identify as transgender with different types of plans from states across the country also described running into red tape and denials when they tried to get coverage. Like Jasmine, Derek Robinson turned to alcohol to forget who he was before he transitioned. Back then, he identified as a woman and a lesbian. His 20s are a blur of blackouts, clashes with family and run-ins with police, he said. Then, he started dating a woman he knew from high school. As they grew close, she came to see how Robinson struggled with his identity and encouraged him to transition. Robinson started taking testosterone in June 2016 as part of his transition. 2 months later, he said, he started wearing a chest binder to minimize the appearance of his breasts and help him look more masculine. His chest was the first thing people would look at when they saw him, he said. Their confused looks made him paranoid and fearful for his safety. Derek Robinson says he's no longer afraid to look in the mirror now that he's had gender-affirming surgery. By the time the couple married in October 2016, he had a mustache above his lip, and his hairline was receding. A few months later, his voice took on a raspy edge. He was eager to undergo surgery. An exclusion for gender reassignment surgery was written into the group plan offered by his employer, even though his home state, Minnesota, forbids discrimination based on gender identity in group and individual plans. A spokesman for his insurer, Medica, told CNN that it follows whatever the employer chooses to include or exclude in self-insured group plans like Robinson's, which are subject to some federal laws but not the ACA. Medica denied his request for gender reassignment surgery, citing the exclusion. But when his psychologist provided a letter recommending bilateral mastectomy to treat Robinson's gender dysphoria, Medica granted the request. Robinson had surgery in October, and after he recovered, he and his wife burned his bras and chest binders. Now, for the first time, he's not afraid to look at himself in the mirror. "I just feel like I see the person I should have been seeing the whole time," he said. "I'm finally living the life I want to live." Bryn Mosman tried to challenge an exclusion for gender confirmation surgery in her employer's group plan in January 2016, thinking Section 1557 and Nevada's anti-discrimination insurance mandate would be on her side. A representative for her insurer told her the plan complied with the most recent requirements of the ACA but noted that Health and Human Services had not yet issued guidance or regulations with respect to many aspects of these laws, which was true at the time. She would later find out that others like her, with self-insured group plans that are not subject to the ACA, have filed complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which enforces workplace anti-discrimination laws. But she wasn't aware of her rights. By the time she had invested the energy in educating herself on the jurisdictional maze of health plans, she had lost her job and her benefits. Now, the software engineer said she works for a new company with benefits for gender-affirming procedures, and she has hope. Autumn Trafficante paid out of pocket for facial feminization surgery. Autumn Trafficante says she spent most of her 20s trying to do the guy thing, after puberty forced upon her a masculine visage. By her late 20s, it got to the point where she couldn't stand to catch her reflection in a car window, let alone a mirror, and see someone she didn't recognize. She tried to feminize her appearance with clothes and makeup, she said, only to have her identity undercut by a stranger calling her the wrong gender. "It really wears on you when your life is made up of moments like that," she said. "I woke up more days than not thinking about killing myself." Right before her 28th birthday, she decided she'd had enough and put together a timeline and a budget for transitioning, she said. Then, she hit a snag with her marketplace plan. Despite letters from her physicians attesting to the medical necessity of the surgery, her insurer said in a denial letter that it considered facial feminization procedures cosmetic. She picked up extra work as a software engineer, extended a line of credit and borrowed money from relatives to scrape together around $70,000 to pay out of pocket for facial feminization surgery in April 2016. 2 years later, she is still trying to seek reimbursement, not just for her own wallet's sake but to set a precedent so that paying out of pocket is no longer necessary. "Even though it left me with more debt than I ever thought I would have, in retrospect, it was the best decision I ever made for myself. Imagining my life without facial feminization surgery is the stuff of nightmares for me, yet that is the reality for the vast majority of trans women," she said. An Oregon graduate student who asked to remain anonymous said she chose her school in part because its health plan offered benefits for gender-affirming procedures. She still spent nearly a year going back and forth with her insurer to get pre-authorization for facial feminization surgery, even with her doctor's endorsement of its medical necessity. Her provider finally agreed, but she said she still had to pay out of pocket because her surgeon required payment up front. She sold her car and pulled money from retirement accounts to cover the $38,000 bill and then requested reimbursement, only to be denied again, documents show. Thanks to efforts of her student union, the plan changed in 2018 to explicitly cover the procedure, and she was able to obtain reimbursement from her insurer. Negotiating the insurance labyrinth. Being transgender is not a mental illness. It's a state of identifying with a gender that differs from the sex you were assigned at birth. But for a transgender person to get coverage for gender-affirming care, they must often be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, a mental disorder. Some contend that the diagnosis inappropriately pathologizes gender noncongruence and should be eliminated. Others argue that the diagnosis ensures access to care. Initially, Jasmine thought the diagnosis would help her obtain coverage. 4 years later, she says it has created barriers to treatment by stigmatizing her with a mental health diagnosis. As soon as Jasmine found out that 12 months of hormone treatment was a prerequisite for genital surgery, she started therapy to confirm a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, she said, even though she didn't have insurance at the time. Her therapist provided a letter for her physician, who prescribed her hormones. She started taking them in July 2012, paying for them out of pocket. Her breasts grew to a C-cup size, and hair growth slowed on her arms and legs. She used hair regrowth treatment and her wispy orange hair grew past her shoulders and filled in her bald spots. As her body started to change, she says, she experienced harassment over her appearance at work. She lost her job as a waitress in Grand Haven and could no longer afford to live on her own. In 2013, she moved into her parents' home, also in Allendale. Her experience is common. A leading survey of the American transgender population found that 30% of respondents who had a job in the previous year reported being fired, were denied a promotion or experienced some other form of mistreatment related to their gender identity. The same survey by the National Center for Transgender Equality underscored the impact of stigma and discrimination on the health of people who identify as transgender. 39% of respondents said they experienced serious psychological distress in the month prior to completing the survey, and 40% had attempted suicide in their lifetime, nearly 9 times the overall attempted suicide rate in the United States. Much of that stress could be related to difficulties accessing healthcare, the survey authors said. 1 in 4 respondents experienced a problem in the past year related to insurance, such as being denied coverage for routine care because they were transgender. More than half of respondents who sought coverage for gender-affirming treatment were denied, and 25% of those who pursued hormone coverage in the past year were unsuccessful. Insurance in the United States is a patchwork of policies that are regulated differently, depending on where and how they were purchased. Almost half of Americans get insurance through their employer, according to data analyzed by the Kaiser Family Foundation for 2016. The other half consists of those without insurance, those relying on Medicare, Medicaid, military plans or plans bought on the ACU market exchange. The breakdown among the U.S. transgender population is similar. According to the 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey, 53% of respondents were insured through an employer-sponsored plan, 14% had plans they purchased directly from insurers or from health insurance marketplaces, 13% were insured through Medicaid, and 14% reported that they were uninsured. Jasmine enrolled in a basic state-funded Medicaid plan through Priority Health in 2014. The first time she requested coverage for surgery, Priority sent her a denial letter. Sex change or transformation was excluded from coverage, it said. This exclusion applies despite any diagnosis of gender role or psychosexual orientation problems. She channeled her anger into researching laws and court rulings to fight the decision. By then, she had heard of Section 1557 and cited it in the appeal of her denial. She called her condition a significant disability that interferes with employment, mirroring language in the World Professional Association for Transgender Health Standards and Research on the Effects of Gender Dysphoria. After 2 reviews, Priority upheld the denial, citing the same exclusion. Federal protection under 1557, a moving target. In 2015, when Jasmine sought coverage for surgery, federal rules may have technically been on her side, but there was ambiguity and room for interpretation. By then, a growing number of court decisions had interpreted federal laws against sex discrimination to apply to people who identify as transgender. And HHS had announced the proposed rule barring discrimination based on gender identity. But such an interpretation had not been codified in the ACA's regulations. Then, in May 2016, HHS Office of Civil Rights (OCR) issued a regulation explicitly stating that discrimination based on sex includes gender identity and sex stereotypes. The regulation applied to Medicaid, Medicare and private insurers offering plans on state marketplaces, forbidding them from excluding gender-affirming care from coverage. The regulation did not tell insurers which services to offer, but it prohibited them from denying transgender patients equal access to coverage for medically necessary services available to other patients, such as mastectomies or prostate exams. As of January 2017, all blanket exclusions were supposed to be removed from policies on the marketplace. But CNN found at least 19 policies offered in 2018 that still had blatant blanket exclusions. When asked about the policies with blanket exclusions, some of the insurers offering them acknowledged that they should not be on the marketplace. Others said Section 1557's regulations no longer applied to the plans because of the Franciscan Alliance lawsuit, a claim that experts dispute, suggesting that there is inertia and confusion about the state of the law that creates bureaucratic hurdles for transgender patients. When CNN pointed out the exclusions to Health First, which offered 8 of the 19 plans, it acknowledged that the plans on healthcare.gov were outdated. The carrier provided documentation showing that it has offered benefits for medically necessary transition-related services since 2017. We apologize for any confusion this administrative oversight has caused, and we are committed to improving the health and well-being of all of our members and our community, said Matthew Jarrell, Senior Vice President of Consumer and Retail Services. However, Jarrell also noted that his understanding was that 1557 did not apply to Health First policies because of the injunction in the Franciscan Alliance lawsuit. Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act bans discrimination based on sex and other characteristics in federally funded healthcare programs and activities. Before 1557's updated regulations could take effect for insurers in January 2017, a federal district court judge said the rule violated the federal religious freedom law. Texas District Judge Reed O'Connor issued a nationwide injunction preventing OCR from enforcing the gender identity provisions of the rule.